Hello, everyone. I'm Ori Hoffer, Director of Communications at the Beeck Center for Social Impact and Innovation here at Georgetown University. This has been a very difficult week with protests taking place all across the country as the issue of race once again comes to the forefront in this land. And I am joined today by Amin-Ra Mashariki. He is a fellow at the Beeck Center. And Amin, thank you for joining us. Your work recently has been focused around the concept of a data drill. We know what a fire drill is. We know what a tornado drill is. But you came up with the concept of a data drill for cities to use when emergencies and crises come up. Tell me a little bit about why that's important, especially in this current moment.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Ori. One of the big conversations that's happening now is around data and evidence and science. And so when I was the Chief Analytics Officer in New York City and the Director of the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, my job was to think about the data that city leadership used in order to respond to operational needs. And so I've always, from that lens, always seen the importance of data, but that you have to go one step further, which is data is important, but how do you ensure that the disparate pieces of your organization, in this instance, cities, the different agencies, the different departments within your cities know how to engage each other in order to integrate that data, think about that data, discuss that data so that it can be used to respond to any emergency, any need for that city, right? And so data drills are a framework and a strategy and a tactic to help sort of create a mechanism and an environment where we can share fast, faster, more efficiently, with a high level of quality and precision, share data to respond to city needs.
And, in this current environment, what are some of the questions that city leaders need to be asking their data teams to help them solve as they're responding to ongoing protests?
Well, it depends on the agency, right? But you can see, depending on the agency, you can see one of the big questions are resources, right? So resource management, resource brokerage. We have a limited number of resources that we can apply to a very large city, right? And so then how do we put these resources in play in the right place with the right amount in order to manage the crises, whether that's COVID-19 or whether that's protesters and so on and so forth. Resources are a big question and many city agencies tend to be challenged around, right? And so you never want to get caught spread thin. So thinking smartly about resources. So I'm certain a lot of big questions are coming out around that.
Now, one of the reasons you got involved in this area, and one of the reasons that data drills were created, were because you saw a need to make sure that vulnerable and often overlooked populations in New York City were not overlooked in the future. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The way that I would couch that is that imagine that you're extremely hungry, and you run into your kitchen and your kitchen cupboard is bare, but there are pickles, there's some potato chips, and there's mayonnaise. But you are hungry. You're gonna figure out how to eat the pickles, mayo, and chips. It's not healthy. Certainly it doesn't taste good, but you need it, so you use it. And that's the analogy I use with data in emergency response, is that we often use the data that we have because we did not think about being prepared beforehand. We didn't stack the cupboard, so to speak, for those times when we knew we were going to be hungry. And so what happens is, because we as cities and as urban centers are challenged in collecting and understanding information and data around these vulnerable communities. And it's very difficult to really, without bias, without any sort of sense of precision and clarity in collecting data around these communities, when emergencies happen and we need to act as cities, when we need to act, we act with what we have. And oftentimes that leaves out, and we've seen it happen time and time again, we leave out those vulnerable communities that we had not spent time thinking about before the emergency, and certainly collecting data and appropriate and correct data about those communities.
And is this a moment where cities will and agencies will come to that realization that they have left people out, and that is maybe what is driving some of this ongoing anger and unrest?
You hope. What I will say is I am certainly feel as though this could be the time in which cities do get out in front of this. Unfortunately, we've seen situations where emergencies have stricken cities, whether it's Katrina, New York City, Chicago in the past, and we have not gotten out in front of this. I do think, though, that there is certainly a renewed energy around data and science and evidence. So there is something percolating here that's a bit different than the past. But I also think, universities, the Beeck Center, one of them has to get out in front of this conversation as well. Communities, community organizations, community members have to get out in front of this conversation, and private sector, because private sector holds data that's going to be useful in a lot of these instances as well, has to get in front of this. So I think what it's going to take, whether or not government acknowledges that they have a sense of how to move going forward, it's still going to take academic institutions, private sector, and community members together moving forward for us to get out in front of this.
And you are obviously with the Beeck Center, with us, working to provide some additional tools for cities, for organizations to use, so that they can understand how to run and operate one of these data drills. Tell me a little bit more about that, and how they'll be able to use this in the future.
Right. So, we just published a blog that really gives us sort of, the way I think about it is an introduction and an overview of data drills and what they are and what they're meant to help in city structures and what they're meant to do as cities use them. What we're working on now, and we're going to be putting out, is really what I refer to as an anatomy of a data drill. It's a breakdown of the different pieces of the data drill and how these pieces work together to be executed such that any city, any entity can adopt those pieces and execute them and ultimately execute a data drill. We'll also, as additional content, we'll be putting out template documents, templates that can be used by anyone who's looking to execute a data drill. And all you have to do is kind of fill in specific information around your city, the people that you want to be a part of the data drill, the challenges or the questions and the scenarios you want to place in front of people to test their skills around. You'll have templates with which you can deploy to really start on the journey of running data drills.
And who are some of the partners that you may be working with, or who should pick up this toolkit to really implement?
Well, definitely city leadership. It could be at the mayor's office, but it can also be at any city's office of emergency response, any city's fire department. But also, I think academic institutions that have relationships with cities would also be a great place where data drills can get executed. Oftentimes, academic institutions have great relationships with the cities that they're in. And there tends to be these sorts of partnerships where the academic institution has the bandwidth and the resources with which to lead such a sort of effort, right? And so I think academic institutions that partner with cities, as well as city leadership, should be looking at adopting this. I would also add that one of the things that we don't talk about a lot is that nonprofits and community-based organizations and churches often jump in during emergency time and play a role. And so they as well, these sorts of organizations as well, should be a part of data drills moving forward.
Fantastic. And, you know, I just did want to talk briefly, your background, you know, this is not from a merely academic perspective for you. You were the guy in the room, in the, you know, emergency management room in New York City doing these very things. Talk a little bit about your background and, you know, sort of what you've learned on the ground that you're bringing to this research.
Yeah, so from my time as the chief analytics officer in New York City, you know, Mayor Bloomberg created that title through executive order in 2013. And so there was about a year for my predecessor to sort of move the ball. But it had never been used in an emergency environment. This title and the office of the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, which we refer to as MODA, had never been used in an emergency context until Sandy. And then when Sandy happened, we realized, gosh, there's a lot that needs to be done. So from my first day, because there was this Sandy After Action report that was published, and it's still online now, that identified all of these things that the Mayor's Office for Data Analytics needs to do to make the city more prepared to respond to emergencies. So from day one, literally from day one, that After Action report was shared with me. And I spent time thinking about how does a centralized data analytics team help agencies, support city leadership in responding to emergencies. So we've thought about these things. And then in 2015, lo and behold, Legionnaires struck the city of New York, and my team was called, the Mayor's Office for Data Analytics, MODA, was called to respond. So I've not only spent time thinking about this because we were asked to ensure that Mayor de Blasio's administration was well prepared for an emergency. So we spent a lot of time thinking about this and all of the pieces that needed to be brought to bear around data and analytics. But then we actually got called upon very heavily, quite frankly, in 2015. At the time, I had 4 analytics associates, we refer to them as, working for me. After that 4-week sprint in response to that emergency, we doubled in size. Not because I asked, but because the mayor's office, City Hall said, you need to double because we see how important the mayor's office is. You need more people working for you because we're going to continue to lean on you. So we did a lot of research to prepare. We stepped up. There were a lot of things we didn't do right. And so after MODA stepped up to that initial emergency response, we began thinking about how do we make ourselves better over time? We're not going to make ourselves perfect the day after tomorrow, but how do we put in place a framework to make ourselves better, to continue learning, to continue working that muscle of using data to respond to city needs? And that's when data drills were born.
All right. Amin Ra, thank you so much for talking about this today. We really look forward to seeing the next piece of the puzzle coming out about data drills, and look forward to being able to share it with the wider community.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure, Ori. Look forward to continuing to work with you and the larger Beeck community to really engage and bring some incredible content and information to governments and communities alike.
Beeck Center Fellow Amin-Ra Mashariki. Thanks so much once again. We'll be talking with you more about future projects down the line.